Right, 26th of October, transport in the time of COVID. Okay, so don't forget to email me or go to the website to see previous editions on YouTube. Right, so kick off on your victim blaming for tonight. This is for Road Safety Week, otherwise known as Break Road Safety Week. If you go, I'm spending a bit of time on this because it's an absolute classic. Despite everything we're saying, they still crack on with this kind of stuff. And here's the link being used by Break, traditional road safety charity. And here you have it. Here they are in transport, in association with Transport for London, who should know better, as an Australian media campaign, Zurich Insurance, some students there, and Fédération Internationale d'Automobile, the International Car Federation, shared responsibility. So here's what they're doing. They're saying a clever and eye-catching campaign by this student is the selected London campaign for the 2021 REACT International Road Safety Behaviour Change Programme. What a great approach to get the shared responsibility. There we go. We're all fragile. So we're kind of like all insects, and I don't know what this means. The message is look out for each other. Absolutely classic false equivalence. There you go. You'll see some of those adverts around in London. And there it is from Break. It's a fantastic way to travel. Thanks very much. But cyclists are vulnerable. Therefore, you know, like, we hadn't realized that, but the implication is then stuff that you should do as a bicyclist, wear high vis and helmets and so on. So it has this campaign has the usual key features: shared responsibility, false equivalence, no difference between your potential to hurt other people according to the mode of transport you choose. Vulnerable road users, I hate that characterization, but what's also interesting here is that the vulnerable road users, people walking about and riding bicycles, are joined in by motorcyclists. Motorcyclists, quite different, inherently hazardous, and of course much more of a danger to pedestrians. That's not referred to, and of course they push helmets. So, okay, that's your victim blaming for this week. Now, the net zero strategy, stuff coming through thick and fast from the government. Okay, so a couple of bits here. Under 16, cycling and walking can help us tackle blah, 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 blah. And the potentially good bit, we will deliver the Prime Minister's bold vision for cycling and walking, investing $2 billion over 5 years, with a vision that half of all journeys in towns and cities will be cycled or walked by 2030. We will deliver thousands of miles, etc., etc. More low traffic neighborhoods and school streets. That looks good. The 17, not so much the 16. However, Carlton Reid's been pointing out that there isn't anything about reducing motor vehicle usage. So the Carbon Brief have questioned the net zero strategy, and he said, the report's transport section doesn't flag the fact that we have to reduce motor vehicle use, not replace 40 million internal combustion engine vehicles with EVs, or did I miss this? Maybe Lisa can say something about this in her bit. And Carlton also points out that there was a visit to the Prime Minister, Grant Shapson, Business Secretary, Trade Secretary, Exchequer Secretary, from the motoring industry. There's no record of what they discussed, but it's reasonable to assume that restricting car use was not on the agenda. And by comparison, here's the graphic I put in last week of from We Are Cycling UK about reducing carbon emissions. And today in The Guardian is an interview with the head honcho of the Climate Change Committee, which is a official government, I suppose you'd call it a kind of quango. And he quotes this report from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, where the Climate Change Committee have said there needs to be a 4% cut in kilometers driven per driver by 2035 from 2019. Now, the interesting thing there for me is that that involves a substantial decrease in vehicle mileage, even by EVs, in urban areas. Because don't forget, the mileage in urban areas is much, much smaller than the overall mileage, which is mainly taken up by interurban, intersuburban, rural, etc. journeys. So that should indicate big cuts in motor vehicle mileage, principally car mileage, in urban areas. And that's something to quote. Okay, police crime sentencing courts bill, that's been a regular over the past few weeks. There's this going through the Lord's second reading briefing on part 5, which is road traffic offences and penalties. And there's a whole big tranche here. I won't go through. This has been organised by Roger Geffen at Cycling UK and supported by British Cycling Pacts, us, Road Danger Reduction Forum, and Road Peace. Clarifying distancing careless and dangerous, greater use of driving bans, maximum penalty for dooring offences, increasing sentences for failings for hit and run, and closing the exceptional hardship loophole. And I can send you the briefing paper if you get in touch with me. The equalities page, here we have, this is something that a pal of mine found at a textile exhibition up north, and it's from the Clarion Cycling Club, and it's untrammeled womanhood. Embrace your sweat, it is your essence and your emancipation. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Yeah, bit of women's equality stuff there. I don't know from when that was done. Okay, on the reading list, here are the ones I've put in previous editions. All good stuff which you should have read. And is there more new stuff? That's how the UK started the climate crisis. Something I put in from 2019 from the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee, and more recent stuff, how to change travel behaviours. Yeah, it's an important one. And big cities can show us the way to a more climate-friendly Britain in the Evening Standard, very important. Okay, from news from around Britain, here's Liverpool. Liverpool's had, shall we say, mixed record over the past couple of years. And Simon O'Brien, who's their champion honcho guy, I think the first time in 20 years, the council actually permanently replaced a traffic lane. Well, he should have said a general traffic lane or main traffic lane for bikes and pedestrians. We just need another 200 miles joined up. So, he has to be kind of nice to the council. He says, let's start, finally. Is it too late? Well, there you go. And of course, I would have put in 2 monodirectionals, but never mind. London, yes, yesterday, the ULEZ, which was in a small part of inner London, has now been extended to all of inner London. I'd like to see it go out to outer London, as would be the Green members of London Assembly. Also, we need to cancel Silvertown Tunnel. But anyway, that's good news. Well done to the mayor for hanging out and pushing that forward. When stuff like that happens, you should on social media say, well done, mayor.
Sorry, Bob, can I just clarify? It's not quite all of inner London.
Oh, right.
I'm actually typing from the one bit of inner London remaining that isn't covered for it. It's chopped Lewisham in half.
Oh, right.
With the South Circular. So half of one inner London borough is now in Ulay.
Oh yeah, yeah. But when I say in London, I mean within the North and South Circular, because there are outer London boroughs that are cut in half by the North and South Circulars, like Brent.
Okay.
Anyway, there you go. This is what happens when you've been a local authority officer in London, and I can mention the 33 London authorities off by heart. Yes. Don't forget, you've seen about how there's been a cut to cycle training and how there's going to be a demonstration by the IWGB Cycling Instructors Branch on 29th of October. Yeah, now, so someone posted this at one of the junctions we've been talking about in Holborn, and there was sort of, oh dear, that doesn't look very good. Mark Philpott said, the little feeder gives more access to the advanced stop line than a full width island would. Had the island been all skinny, then you might have had drivers further to the right to turn left with people cycling trying to get up the inside, which is bad. So it's a short-term measure pending more work. And Simon, who's here, has said, again, it's a temporary measure, thinks it's working really well, enforces lane discipline for those going left and ahead. So the lorry in the picture would before have been doing a wide swing from middle lane to turn left, except instead it's sitting where it's meant to be. And the cyclist is forced to hang back. No bad thing, given again it's a temporary measure. The big issue here is not this scheme, it's now the right hook of motor vehicles turning from Vernon to Southampton Row across heavy westbound cycle flow. That needs the most urgent fix now, but the entire junction needs permanent, high quality, safe changes that also deal with the particularly heavy east-west cycle flows. If you're in London, do go down there and you see loads of people cycling east-west. You can go to have a cup of tea and look mum no hands and visit Condor Cycles, and it's all nice. There's lots of people cycling there. But we have talked about these junctions at some length in previous issues. And I think, you know, I don't know if someone wants to say anything else, it can do so at the end. Unless, do you want to say anything else, Simon? Yes, he does. Unmute yourself, Simon.
Hi, yeah, just to say, expect the next little bit of news about that junction coming Friday, and more to come from us and other places, as it were. But yeah, the short answer is, I think while there is some absolutely valid and some less valid criticisms about the temporary measure, the temporary measure is broadly working okay, and has certainly, I think, cut the road danger at that location quite significantly. But the rest of the junction, the other junctions in Holborn, the other junctions on the London Boulevard, the other junctions across London remain. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Ealing, bit of good news from Ealing. Fisher's Lane has a bit of filtered permeability there, and the council has kept that closed to motor traffic. So Ealing Council doing something good there. Now, Westminster, this is being picked up by Linus Rees of Fitzrovia News. All Souls Church of England Primary School in Ridinghouse Street. The street has been currently filtered all the time, but under the school street programme will be opened and subject to a time closure enforced only by signs. So, and he's got an article there. And so it appears there that the introduction of a school street has actually meant there are going to be more motor vehicles going past that school, and that even at opening up and closing times, it's not going to be that perfectly controlled. There's also some good news thing from a school street elsewhere. At the Arcatwood Primary, Silvio Gaudreau has pointed out that they finally managed to get one. You know, me being a bit sort of glass half empty here, you know, it's only 25 minutes in the morning and half an hour in the afternoon. So, you know, the fact we have to fight for these things is indicative of the depth of the problem. Right, now, it's a classic example of people saying thank you to the mayor for the ULEZ. And here, these posters have gone up, Breathe Easy Londoners. The ULEZ introduced yesterday, as I've already said, and that has gone up. These have gone up in Islington, and this is in Hackney New Primary Schools, bit of a sign there. And Mum Salunks have said, this campaign is collaboration between us and 9 other groups across London, like Air Haringey, Better Streets for Kensington, Chelsea, and others. So they've actually got these posters out there, and they said, thank you to the mayor. Classic case of what you're supposed to do when you're campaigning. Okay, drawing towards the end, here's graphic from Cycling UK, who've organised rides up to COP26, and they got this put up on the motorway up in Scotland. Extinction Roads Rebellion having demonstration against the £27 billion spend on new roads. We do try to be something of a community here, and I was asked to mention, oh, sorry, before we do that, here's a bit of stuff from 1935 in Somerset. The schools children were given bicycles as they lived too far away from their school to walk. So this is from 1935. That's a nice little graphic there. Okay, yeah, I was going to say, try to be a bit of a community, and I was asked to mention this lady, Emma Metcalfe, who unfortunately died from breast cancer. And some of you will have known her from Cycle Sheffield and Pedal Nottingham. So rest in peace, Emma Metcalfe. And the final graphic, I think that's outside Sylvia's home. Again, a poster welcoming ULEZ. Just stop sharing. I don't know if Simon, Dave and Mark have got questions.
Great, thanks Bob, that was really great. Yeah, I can see a few hands up, so we'll just take any questions or comments before we move on to Lisa. Mark,
I think you need to pick who's speaking first. So
yeah, I was fine. Just about to get on to that. Mark, you're the first on my list. Do you want to start?
Yeah, as a Scouser, I just wanted to comment on the Liverpool situation. I was up there for the protest ride and rally about a month ago. And Liverpool Cycling Campaign, which is a fairly new organisation that started up, some of you might have come across Merseyside Cycle Campaign, but Liverpool Cycling Campaign has sort of started up and is trying to be a bit more radical. They're not at all happy with what's gone in. Not so much from the principle, but from the detail. It's too narrow. And in the chat, I think Robert was saying about the hard-edged curbs. That's the particular element, and also the fact that it was built, and when it was built, it finished at a sharp drop of about 6 inches. They hadn't actually built the ramp to take you back down to the road level. It just had a vertical edge at the end of the cycle track. So there's a lot of flaws with it. And the particular issue, which I don't know if Mark, Ranty Mark is here, but the particular issue is about the hard 90-degree curbs rather than forgiving curbs, which are what's being built now. If you do hit them or miscalculate them, especially if you're in a wheelchair, mobility or scooter, you know, they are worse than hitting a forgiving curb, which is what's being done in London now. So there is a lot of disquiet. As I think Bob said, Simon O'Brien has to be nice to Liverpool and Merseyside, Transport for Merseyside and so on. They have to be nice to them, but they're not at all happy with the detail. And they feel particularly aggrieved that they haven't been given any involvement in any of the design. And there's a particular issue with a lot of places where stakeholders are expected to feel grateful for what is usually a good idea, but you're supposed to just say thank you for anything you get. And I can see Simon smiling at that, but often we know a lot more than the designers about what the tiny details that make things really good, but we're not allowed to put those comments in because they don't want to talk to even the people who work on it somewhere else, like me.
I'd just like to back that up after my comment in the chat room. This is what I'm getting at. It's absolutely horrendous. And there's some really, really shit infrastructure just gone into Newcastle, and everybody says, "Oh, look, it's really good." It's not. It's shit. It's red. Those curb edges basically trap you in a trough. So you might want to exit that particular cycleway to turn left or turn right somewhere else, and you can't do it because you're actually blocked in. And almost every single place where it's used up in Newcastle, except the very wide bit down Pilgrim Street, gets full of junk and glass and debris and everything else, and it so rarely gets cleaned out that actually I've given up using quite a lot of it because it's just shit. And nobody else does it. Why do we do it? I don't understand. I don't understand why engineers allow that shit to go on. Sorry, rant over.
I'm not really sure what you mean there, Robert. Do you want to?
There's lots of the stuff down Elsick Road, hard edge curbs, and yet there's filled in cycleways further down Elsick Road towards the junction with Westgate Road. Yeah, but all the other stuff is hard edge curbs. The bit past Lidl, hard edge curbs. And it gets full of junk and wheelie bins and people and everything else. The new bit of infrastructure that really, really upsets me right now is that bit on Harris Bridge. Whereas if you're going northbound and sit at the traffic lights behind the bus because there's no cycleway on Percy Street, turn left, you end up in a hard edge curbed section of cycleway going up. That's west out on Claremont Road, to a traffic lights 2 meters into that traffic lane, which basically stops you as a cyclist from continuing on. And then when you are allowed to go, I mean, I just didn't see it was red. It was red. I've got video of me going through it. It's an awful piece of design. And then you end up in a hard-edged piece of cycle lane, which then either dumps you onto a footway with no exit point at any point in time, or turning right directly into oncoming traffic. It's insane.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and this is probably a conversation for another day, but sometimes there's also the issue that the alternative just has cars parked on it. So I think there's a lot of problems basically with that kind of with design. Simon, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, just two things. One was on Riding House Street, which is that this is Westminster quite at its worst from what I can gather, which is that the road was being shut for so long that the school built a hall on the other side of the road, and now the kids are going backwards and forwards across the road all the time during the day. So Westminster has then said, after having said the road will never reopen, and now saying, oh, it'll be reopened during the middle of the day, when there are kids walking backwards and forwards across the road. So that's Westminster doing Westminster things. And I just wanted to say it's worse than you even might think, really. This is a classic example of that borough doing the way that only a few central London boroughs do. On the curb thing, maybe like this is where I just wanted to say as well, following Bob, this is don't make perfect the enemy of good territory. It really is, in my view. What we're talking about here, presumably, is a massive expansion of the cycling network, and the design details aren't great. But the simple truth is you've had a massive load of cycle tracks put in. That's a good thing. And actually, once the curbs are in, it's quite easy to then flip them to be a bit more forgiving, to be, as Mark says in the chat, 45 degrees rather than, rather than right angle, or maybe we can even get some forgiving curbs in, etc. But the simple truth is that represents, while the design detail and the officers need to get across that as quickly as they can, obviously, but that represents a huge leap forward, surely, for Newcastle in terms of new cycle tracks going in. And that's a good thing. London is full of, if you look at the East-West Cycle Superhighway, the embankment route, that is 90-degree curbs everywhere. And we don't complain about it. Instead, we have 11,000, 12,000 people a day riding on it. Come on, this is really, you can do good things and still get some details wrong. It's really important to focus on the good bit as well.
I think also
it's just not good enough.
Yeah, Yeah,
It-
this
it
is the
sounds
issue.
good.
Sorry, Robert, can I jump in? I think also this is the issue when you've got this very kind of, erratic kind of funding, bits of money here and there, and it's really difficult to design a network at all when you don't even know, what you're ever going to be able to do next. I'm just going to bring in one more person. Actually, I'll bring in David and then Brian, if you can be really brief.
Oh,
Right.
hi. Just on Riding House Street, I think Andy Beverley of Westminster Healthy Street said it had been, the consultation as usual, being gamed by the motoring lobby. And that's one of the reasons for Westminster's decision. But that's by the by. I really want to say that there was a great consultation on traffic management in Covent Garden, which is Camden and Westminster. But there was one huge failing, which they've continued to allow the rat run through Great Queen Street and Shelton Street. I can share my screen if you want, or perhaps not. There's not time. Can you hear me?
I think we'll give it a skip for today because I just want I want to let.
Okay, let me just finish off then. So Camden, so this means that all traffic is diverted down these narrow lanes in Covent Garden. All east-west traffic is taken by sat-nav along Great Queen Street and Shelton Street, which is really awful for pedestrians and for any cyclists. I think Camden are up for looking at this again and trying to change it. So all I would urge people to do is try and put pressure on and comment on the need to do something about this dreadful rat run. Great Queen Street is the main entrance to Covent Garden from the east, and it really shouldn't be a major rat run. I don't know if anybody else has any comments.
Thanks, David. Brian, I can see you in your cagoule there.
I just wanted to say hello. I'm checking out the climate ahead of COP26 in Scotland here. There's a Loch Ness looking suitably
I know,
wet.
nice.
So I've been listening in, but just on the Camden one, I'm kind of with David on that one. I know that one really well, so we'll have to watch out for that. I'll keep you posted. But anyway, yes, it's wet and windy. That's me on the street, and back over to you. Good to see you.
Right, so now we've got Lisa Hopkinson here from Transport for Quality of Life, and she's going to talk to us about decarbonising transport. So you should be able to share your screen, Lisa. You want to?
Okay, great. Let me just try that.
Yeah.
Is that working?
Yeah, you're not in slideshow mode yet, but we can
do
see
that. Okay,
Perfect.
lovely. So you can hear me okay. Thank you very much. And hi to everybody here. Sorry to interrupt a very interesting conversation. So I'm Lisa, and after a chance email with Brian, he suggested I come and present. And sorry, first time I've ever heard about Ideas with Beers, so it's very nice to meet you all, and I can see you're all from all over the country. I'm going to talk today about planning for less car use, how we reduce car dependency. And a lot of the slides are drawn from a series of 9 briefings that my colleague Lynn Sloman and I did for Friends of the Earth in 2019 and some subsequent work. This presentation is almost identical to one I gave on Saturday to Skate. So if there's anybody from Skate here, you may want to just go and make a cup of tea. And obviously some of this, a lot of the people here, you're very knowledgeable, and I'm sure a lot of this will be quite familiar to lots of you, so apologies for that. But I'll take about 20 minutes and just go through these slides, and then we can talk about it afterwards. So just to put some context about why we need to reduce car use. So transport, I'm sure most of you know this, transport is now the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK. In 2019, it accounted for more than 1/3 of the UK's total transport emissions, and emissions in every other sector apart from transport have reduced since 1990, but emissions from transport have actually increased. And road transport, and particularly cars, are the biggest contributor to the UK's transport emissions. So we have an urgent need to decarbonise the whole transport system. But it's not just carbon. I mean, obviously, if we replaced every petrol and diesel car and vehicle on the road with electric or hydrogen today, that would obviously solve the carbon problem. But there's a whole host of other problems with car and other traffic. I won't go through these. I'm sure you're more than familiar. And for those of you with long memories, this is a photo of the construction of the very controversial Newbury bypass, which destroyed couple of sites of special scientific interest. But even when new roads don't destroy, World Heritage sites or ancient woodlands, you know, quite often they're destroying quite valuable local habitat. So there's a growing evidence base that decarbonising road transport cannot just involve replacing petrol and diesel cars with electric vehicles. We need fewer cars, not newer cars. And Robert kindly referred to the work we did for FOE, which showed that we need to reduce car mileage by about 20 to 60%. This was before the whole net zero strategy came out. But there's two recent reports, this one by Element Energy, which is the evidence base for the Scottish Government's target to reduce traffic by 20% by 2030 on 2019 levels. And there's also the report by CREDS, a consortium of universities. And that showed, their analysis showed that we need a 30 to 50% cut in traffic by 2030. So that's quite a transformation. So it's clear for many different reasons, we need a completely different approach to transport and planning to reduce the dominance of the cars. And I'm going to sort of talk about 4 key things that we need to do that. We need to replace car trips with public transport, walking and cycling. We need to reallocate road space in existing neighbourhoods. In new developments, we need car-free planning. And lastly, we need to avoid or restrain unnecessary car travel. So it's not just a matter of you know, switching as many trips to alternative modes. We actually need to get car travel down, and particularly car mileage, not just car trips, because for carbon, it's the mileage that's important rather than the trips. So let's start with mode shift. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to create a comprehensive integrated public transport network with good walking and cycling access to bus stops and train stations, and an integration of the two. And in many parts of Europe, public transport services, they're frequent, they're well connected, they run from early in the morning to late at night, 7 days a week, and even in rural areas like this one in Austria shown here. And this is because in Europe, public transport functions as a single system coordinated by public transport governing bodies, and they provide one network, one timetable, one ticket. And this is radically different from our deregulated, uncoordinated, privatized public transport system in the UK, outside London, that is. To achieve the same in Britain, we need local authorities to regulate local bus and tram services, and we also need the railway to be a single entity acting in the public interest and under public control. And this just doesn't apply to urban areas, it's also rural areas as well. And see, a report by my colleague Ian Taylor for CPRE shows with the right investment, even our towns and villages can have a reliable, frequent and cheap public bus service, including an hourly bus service to every village in England 7 days a week. And the one-off spending in the government's new bus strategy is very welcome, but it's not enough. We need sustained, continuous year-on-year investment in buses. And this can be achieved by redirecting just a portion of the 27 billion planned for the government's road building programme. So I think CPRE estimated 2.7 billion would provide an hourly bus service to every village in England. We can also look at free buses. So local public transport is already free in more than 100 towns and cities across the world. This is Dunkirk in France with a population of 90,000. And they made their buses free in autumn 2018. At the same time, they transformed their bus networks. So 1 year later, bus trips are up 85%. Half of new bus users previously drove. 1 in 10 new bus users had sold their second car, and there was evidence that it was leading young people to delay getting a driving license. And it's also happening in the UK, believe it or not, since the start of September this year. I don't know if there's anybody from Herefordshire here. All bus travel within Herefordshire is free at weekends. And this is what is needed to encourage people back onto buses and to prevent a car-led recovery. So that's local public transport, but also walking and cycling. We've got to transform our streets so that everyone feels safe walking and cycling. And this is going to require rapid construction of networks of segregated cycleways in all urban areas, as well as radiating out to surrounding suburbs and towns and villages. And this is a map of the Cycle Superhighway program that is underway in Denmark. they're building nearly 750 kilometers of long distance cycle superhighways, radiating up to 40 kilometers from Copenhagen. And this place here, Farum-Ruten, is 21 kilometers outside Copenhagen. And this is what it looks like. And we need a similar program. We need to build continuous segregated cycle and pedestrian paths alongside every single carriageway main road for at least 15 kilometers either side of every settlement. And that way we'll get a proper integrated long distance network. And e-bikes make all this, much more possible because they have great potential to replace car trips. Around half of all e-bike trips replace trips that would otherwise have been made by car. So they're really, really an important part of the whole sort of, carbon reduction policy strategy. They're used for longer journeys, they make light work of hills, and they have broader appeal, including to women, older people, people who are less active, who have health problems. So e-bikes, suddenly make carbon reduction from bikes a real player. So the second thing we need to do is to reallocate road space. And obviously this is already happening with the Active Travel Fund, local authorities providing more space for walking and cycling, albeit not perfect, but at least it's something. I'm sure I don't need to explain to all of you what a low traffic neighbourhood is. I love this before and after picture of Waltham Forest, one of the first LTNs. You can see on the left what it looked like before and on the right how it looks now. Obviously it's common in Dutch cities. There are dozens of schemes in England. They're rolling it out in other places. Obviously it's very controversial. And there's evidence that people inside the LTN drive less and walk or cycle more as a result. It's not just about switching, single car journeys. It's about changing the whole way people live their lives. And obviously, quite recently, Birmingham has announced what it calls a transformative transport plan to see this whole car-centric city become a supersized low traffic neighbourhood. And in Birmingham, a quarter of the city's car journeys are 1 mile or shorter. And I'm sure that's true in a lot of cities and towns across the UK. And then obviously we've talked about school streets. Don't want to talk about the Westminster example, but we can reduce car dependency and encourage more active travel, obviously through measures such as school streets. These reduce traffic overall, and there's evidence that they lead to a fall in car ownership. And again, it's not just about replacing a short drive with a walk or cycle, but about changing the whole way people live their lives. And a study that we did for climate charity Possible and Mums for Lungs, it suggested that around half of all schools in 4 cities could potentially be suitable for school streets. And this would increase to about 2/3 if you introduce things like bus gates. And that's for existing neighbourhoods, but for new developments, we need better planning to create homes and spaces where walking, cycling and public transport are the natural choice for moving around. I'm sure this looks familiar. This is a typical dismal car-dependent development that you see up and down the country, often built on greenfield sites, on the edges of settlements, or God forbid, in the middle of nowhere. And this helps to, create and perpetuate the whole car dependency in the long term and create urban sprawl. And anybody interested in this, check out Transport for New Homes website and their campaign to help improve the planning around new developments. So this was one of the 9 policy briefings we did for Friends of the Earth. This particular one was on planning and transport. And we looked at the important role of land use planning to reduce the need to travel and the distance traveled by car. And we looked at evidence on how planning can reduce car travel. The most important measure is location, because developments in central locations are likely to generate far less car travel than even the best designed development in a remote location. So to stop car-dependent urban sprawl, what we need to do is virtually all new development has to be on brownfield land in existing urban areas, preferably at very high densities, located near to public transport and good walking and cycling networks. these are the headline recommendations from that planning briefing. Most of them aimed at government and national policy. I'm not going to go through all of these now, but have a look at the report if you're interested. But it does require a fairly major overhaul of the national planning policy framework, as well as having a sort of high level objective in planning for well-being, a bit like the Welsh Well-being of Future Generations Act. And these are some of the things that we can push for in local plans, local campaigners can do. So brownfield first policy, locating development around public transport, maximizing housing densities. They should be at least 80, 90, 100 dwellings per hectare, not the 30 dwelling per hectare sort of horrible developments that we see at the moment, little boxy housing developments. We need to locate all of our development as much as possible in town and city centres, in urban centres, not on the edges of settlement, and certainly not out in the middle of nowhere. We need to restrict parking, and crucially, all our local plans should include carbon targets aligned with the climate emergency. So there are many examples in Europe of very well planned communities that reduce their reliance on the car. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Freiburg and the neighborhood of Vauban in Germany. And this is a car-free, compact, dense neighborhood. It mixes homes with diverse uses. It was developed along a light rail route here, which was obviously put in before people moved into the houses rather than 7 years later. And in Vauban, it's a normal sight to see children playing on the streets. And although it achieves very high densities of 95 dwellings per hectare, this is not a high-rise development. But these are mostly 3 or 4 story dwellings. But as you can see, there's large amounts of green space as well. So unfortunately, there are very few good examples in the UK of housing designed for less car use. This is one that in Leeds city centre, designed by Situ. It's the Climate Innovation District. It has over 500 low-rise, low-carbon homes, just along the river. It's designed as a car-free environment that encourages walking and cycling and play, focused around parks and shared gardens. And they're also planning a primary school, which is being designed as car-free. It was going through planning permission. I'm not sure what the current status is, but hopefully it's received that planning permission now. So it's also high density, but it's, again, as in Vauban, it's low or medium rise with lots of green space. And although this is in a city centre, this would be just as appropriate in a town or even a village location. Other car-free developments, this is one Brighton, which was the first car-free development in the UK, developed by Bioregional, 172 apartments with just 4 car spaces. Although it was built in the middle of the recession, it still managed to turn a profit. And this is a car light development, it's not car-free. This is York City Council plans for 600 low-carbon new homes across 7 sites. 3 sites are currently in the planning and design stages. This one at Dunscombe Barracks is designed by Michael Riches, who developed the award-winning Goldsmith Street in Norfolk. They've got 34 homes planned with just 19 parking spaces, 3 of them for wheelchair access residents, a further 2 for visitors, and the other 14 parking permits are going to be on a first come, first served basis. So lastly, even after we've done all this, we still need to avoid or restrain unnecessary car travel. We have to cut our car mileage by at least 20% by 2030 to achieve our carbon goals, but preferably more for all the other reasons that I've talked about. So there are very many different ways of doing this, but we think the best solution to cut car mileage is a pay per mile eco levy, and this would be a road user charge with the charge linked to the distance driven, the type of area, whether it's a rural area, urban area, whether there are good alternatives. It would be linked to vehicle size, and it would be linked to emissions. But even a modest charge of a few pence per kilometre could raise quite a significant sum of money, and this could transform transport in the ways that I've been describing earlier. It could provide funding for a whole package of benefits, crucially including free bus travel. So the benefits would obviously need to be delivered before charging is introduced, so people have an alternative to drive, and it would need to be fair to people who have no choice but to drive. All local authorities have the power to introduce an eco levy or road user charge, but other than London, no one has had the courage before now. Obviously, we're getting a few ultra low emission zones now, but that's more a sort of an area, that's not a distance-based charge. And we think the best chance of persuading politicians and people is to combine a pay per mile eco levy on driving with free local public transport. And it doesn't even have to be an area-wide charge. Durham has had a congestion charge since 2008 and charges non-resident drivers £2 for entering its World Heritage Site. Traffic dropped 85% after it was introduced, and the revenue helps to fund the cathedral bus service. So just to end on a positive example, which shows things how things can change for the better. I'm not sure if how many of you followed the case of the M4 Relief Road in Southeast Wales. This was a very controversial scheme that went to public inquiry. It was a 14-mile stretch of motorway that would have tarmacked over the Gwent Levels, coastal, really globally important coastal wetlands between Newport and the Severn Estuary. And this report here, which was commissioned by the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, done by UE, Sustrans and others, it showed how with a package of sustainable travel measures, alternatives, they could cut congestion for less cost than the M4 Relief Road. In the end, the Welsh Government axed the M4 scheme because of the cost and the environmental concerns, and they set up a commission chaired by Lord Burns to look at alternatives. And they came up with nearly 60 recommendations. None of them were included in New Road. And the Burns Delivery Unit was established earlier this year to accelerate the implementation of the recommendations. And they've been given a budget of over 4 million this financial year to progress plans for new rail, bus and active travel infrastructure, which will form a network of alternatives for South East Wales. We need a similar process in England. We need to freeze the roads programme, review every single scheme, and look at whether we can provide better alternatives that reduce carbon rather than increase it. So all of the ideas presented here today, they're already being implemented either in the UK or elsewhere in the world. They're entirely achievable with political will and leadership. And I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that as well as achieving carbon reductions in carbon emissions, they deliver a whole host of benefits, cleaner air, improved health, quieter and safer streets, more convivial neighbourhoods, and a fairer transport system. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fantastic. I think somebody in the chat said that's such a comprehensive survey, and really we need to, all our councillors all over the country to understand that. But actually, really, we need everybody to understand that. I think I wondered whether to what extent. Not only is there an issue that we haven't got national leadership and funding, but also, that trickles right down into people not generally understanding how all of those things join up. And I wonder what you thought about, it's a big message to get across. Does it start with government kind of coming in with that, or are there other ways of building up to persuading government that needs to happen?
Yeah, I think it needs to come, obviously needs to come from top down in terms of the funding, because that's absolutely critically, important for local authorities that have been hollowed out, and, this drip sort of year on year funding. But I think, there's a bottom up swell that is happening and needs to happen. Obviously, places like Greater Manchester, with their bus re-regulation, there are local exemplars everywhere, of local councils trying to do good things, and they need to be encouraged and supported, and that needs to be copied. But I think you're absolutely right, that message just hasn't got through, that we need to cut traffic, because government has been pushing this line that all we need to do is replace cars with electric vehicles. And all the techno optimists in government, they've been pushing this line for so long that every local politician I know of believes that. And when you say we need to cut traffic, they're like, well, why? And they don't realize the benefits of that either, as well as how can we and I think for a lot of local councils it's very difficult, because the only funding streams for many years have been new roads. There's they've had to cut their bus services. There's been very little funding for active travel, apart from the active travel fund quite recently, and that just shows what can be done in just a few years. So I think that messaging still needs to get out, I think, to local councils, local politicians, as well as national politicians. Some of them get it, some local councils get it, but I think in the main, most of them are still thinking in terms of, electric charging points.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's all too much the case. I'm gonna bring in people for questions. I'm just gonna go through the first sort of top of the list. I can see Caroline Nash, are you there? Caroline? No.
Oh, yes. I don't know whether it's a question or just an observation. When new roads are put forward, they have to put together a business case. And unfortunately, the way the business case works is the reduction in congestion of the road traffic. That's a positive. It's a reason to fund the business case. But things like the additional time it takes pedestrians and cyclists, because you've diverted them half a mile up the road to cross a bridge and so on, their time isn't valued the same way that the car travel is. And these are DFT formulas and so on, methods for working out the business case. So we need DFT to review their funding models. That's just my observation.
No, I totally agree, Caroline. You've touched on the dark arts of transport appraisal. And one of our briefings for Friends of the Earth was on governance. And we looked at the whole cost benefit analysis, where time savings, over 60 years, over millions of motorists, absolutely dwarf any benefits, any costs of carbon or air pollution or anything else. And we've said, we have to overhaul the whole cost benefit approach. And that example I gave, that Welsh report, that they use a multi-criteria approach analysis. It shouldn't be based on a cost benefit analysis, particularly one that is so biased and skewed towards roads and the ridiculous time saving metric.
I'm going to bring Bob in. Bob, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so if I can kind of pick up on something, I was talking about this in my presentation, also noted what David Arditi said about how the main places where cycle routes and networks have gone in have been in around the centres of cities or inner cities. And what we're really missing out on is those routes out to suburban areas or thinking about rural areas. And I was talking about this before when I referred to the need to cut emissions and how that relates to most motor vehicle mileage being not people commuting or driving around inner cities or inner areas of London and other places. And one of the things I saw, I didn't mention this before, was someone who said that if all journeys under 5 miles, which is kind of what we're talking about as sort of normal cyclable distances, I mean, in fact, I think we're now using 10 kilometers, but never mind, let's just say 5 miles. If all motor vehicle car, or at least car miles under car journeys under 5 miles were replaced completely by active travel, you would only get a 15% cut in greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector. So this is again emphasizing the point that the very least we can do is get the shift to active travel in towns and cities. We actually also need to be thinking about much more about replacing car usage in interurban journeys, rural journeys, and so on. And that's why you've got people like Professor Gillian Hannibal talking about the use of e-bikes in rural areas and so on. Because that's, and you know, the real problems for cycling in rural areas are that you have much higher speeds in motor vehicles, motorists aren't watching out so much more. So certainly in terms of fatal crashes and serious road danger of that kind, the real issues are actually outside cities, which doesn't mean that we don't go ahead with active travel in cities and towns, but that we have to do that at the very least. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that highlights the, I don't know about the exact figures, but certainly it's mileage rather than trips that count for carbon. But
yeah,
you know, e-bikes, you know, because you know a sort of standard e-bike trip is what, 10 miles or something, you know, that really does start to eat into the sort of, you know, carbon budget. But we need cycle routes everywhere. We need them, you know, in city centres, out to the suburbs, between villages, you know, everywhere really. And if you can't, you know, and as you said, in rural areas, you know, sometimes it's quite difficult, but then you just reduce the speed limit. You know, you have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in villages, you know, and then, you know, maybe 40 miles an hour on the rural roads, you know, whatever it is. But it's not rocket science, and it's entirely achievable. But yes, we need to look at all travel, not just urban travel. We need to look at suburban travel, leisure travel, long distance travel, you know, getting, you know, bikes and trains, you know, that combination can reduce a lot of long distance trips as well. So yeah.
Yep.
Thanks. Right, Brian, you've got your hand up. Are you there?
I'm here. Thanks. Yeah, I was going to ask a different question, but I've been inspired to ask a little bit about the role of government in the decarbonisation plan. And for me, it was like a classic, here's the big picture, we all switch to electric cars, then it all goes away. And I think like most things, they're waiting for it to roll down, then it goes to regional authorities and local authorities to start doing the maths on it. And then you start looking at stuff from Lisa and going, actually, I mean, I won't mention the authorities, but we worked out switching to electric cars was a higher cumulative total of CO2 than just keeping the cars that were already there on the network. It's just whether Lisa thinks they're waiting for that kind of local maths to take place. And that's where the reality comes in, that it's less cars. And that's when we actually start having to do the maths properly. Just be interested to get Lisa's take on that kind of chasm between reality and local interests.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you know, you'd have this sort of, you know, Russian doll sort of carbon budgets. You'd have the sort of, you know, department, you know, transport would have its own carbon budget, and then this would, you know, roll down to sort of, you know, subnational level and then to local level. But all local authorities have carbon budgets. You know, the Tyndall Centre have done, you know, really Paris-aligned real carbon budgets, not political carbon budgets. And any local authority that has declared a climate emergency should be using those figures. And if they actually use those figures, then they would have to, you know, dramatically reduce traffic. But as far as I know, no local authority that I'm aware of. I think Cambridge was trying to put a carbon target into its local plan. But no, local authorities are not doing the maths right now. And DfT has not done the maths either. You know, even in their, you know, in the net zero strategy and the decarbonisation plan, they've got their emissions pathway, but they haven't shown how they're going to meet that emissions pathway through electrification alone. And that's why, you know, that report that I mentioned by Element Energy of Scottish Energy, it's a really robust analysis which shows why the Scottish government has put that target in its plan. The CREDS report is really robust. There are other reports that I'm aware of that will be coming out hopefully before Christmas. All the evidence is piling on government, and they have not produced a single, you know, calculation to support their argument that electric vehicles can get us out of this mess.
Yeah, I do know, just to come back quickly, I do know some regional authorities, to not name names, who have worked out and have done the maths, but it's a question of like, who pops the bubble first?
Yeah, sorry, Transport for North, I know, I've done some good work on emissions pathway, that's true.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for that, Lisa. Great to hear from you.
Is that information publicly available then, Brian, or is that? No. Okay, I'm going to take Dave and then Mark, and then I think we have David Harrison. Do you want to go first?
Thanks, Ali. I was just putting bits about bus services, just saying to Ruth, because Ruth, when she's in Harrogate, cycles everywhere, but Harrogate's for the past 2 years had free buses on Sundays, and the utilisation has nearly doubled. They got a sponsor for it. Manchester has free city centre buses, and the reason you have a free city centre bus that's frequent is it takes all the short trips off the out-of-town buses. Now, in American cities, they make city centre bus services during the working day free, because that reduces the peak vehicle requirement that you need to run the service. So every extra bus that you have to put onto a service is about 150 grand a year for the bus, the driver, the servicing. Arriva in Liverpool, when they lost the bus lanes, one route had to put 11 buses, extra buses on the route to maintain the frequency, costing them over £1 million a year to maintain the frequency. And I think we've got to try and turn the equation around, particularly for Manchester, and also the idea that you have services that will be used to get people from where they are to where they want to be. We have a number of hospitals, excuse me, in the Borders. The hospital has the bus route diverted so that all buses run past the main door of the hospital. That means that no bus operator has a time penalty. Sorry, I'm just joking. Let me clear this right.
Have a drink.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I think I've cured it now. I've talked through it. All the buses went past on the main A7. To serve the hospital, they have to drive into a cul-de-sac, which costs them 8 to 15 minutes to drive to the hospital and come out again. So that means all the main through bus services never go past the hospital. But by having a route that took the buses right through the hospital, exclusively for the buses and the ambulances, so no car traffic, all the bus services serve the hospital, and everybody sits in the WRVST room waiting for the bus, and the bus shelter is used as a smoking shelter. It makes the thing work. Manchester particularly, I'm very interested in people in Manchester to talk to them. You have Stepping Hill Hospital, car-centric. It's only 300 metres from a station, yet you can't get from that station to the hospital directly. It's not advertised as such. The space is such, the best thing there is to move the station 300 metres and come straight off the platform into the hospital. Now, we have an example in Glasgow where the hospital and station are connected by a 10-minute walk. It gets 1.8 million boardings a year. That's really big for a 2-platform local station. And we go around Manchester, the country, Moses Gate for the Royal Bolton, 20,000 boardings a year. And you see how the Royal Bolton's drowning in cars. It's less than a 6-minute bike ride from Moses Gate Station. So if we're going to do this sort of thing, let's have a look at what's generating the journeys so that people get from A to B. And finally, the thing I'm always telling bus operators, it's actually cheaper sometimes to get the passenger to the bus than the bus to the passenger. In Lincolnshire, the Route 10 was a decrepit, subsidised bus service ran every hour between Lincoln and Skeggy. And they modified the route so it didn't go around every village green, but they focused on getting people from the village greens to the nodes along the A57. Within 3 years, it was a half-hourly bus service with new buses and pretty much commercial rather than subsidised. So we've got to look at, instead of taking the bus around every last village with a route that's not competitive with car use, you have a bus that people will go to because they can jump on the bus and get into town and do the journey in the same time it would take them to drive and park. All they have to do is get to the bus on the main road. And, once we've got that sort of thinking, perhaps we would not be sort of having buses that cost a lot of money to go to every last nook and cranny of the estate.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks. I just
Sorry
wonder.
about that. Oh, it's a hobby horse of mine, but
there's
I want
a
to.
lot there to unpick. I wonder if Lisa wants to come back on any of that. Otherwise,
yeah, just to say that's really interesting, and that just, to me, that makes the case for regulation, because once you've got a guiding mind, a local authority that can look at all the different pieces of the jigsaw and plan it properly, rather than operators just doing their own thing. But also, you're right, looking at the main trip generators like hospitals or big employers, and seeing, where do people actually want to go, and providing, a service for them, or maybe it's a cycle route or whatever. I live in a town where there's no bus service between the train station and the hospital, and they're only like less than a mile away. It's ridiculous.
Well, we have 20.
Thanks, Dave. I think we'll move on now. I want to squeeze in a couple more questions before I think, and if anybody else has a burning question, now's your time to think about it. Mark, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, we've known all of this, the detail, for some time. I mean, we did a site visit to Copenhagen. David Arditi was on it in 2013, if I remember rightly, and we cycled back from Farum on the Danish long distance route. We've known all about this. The big problem, as we've seen with sewage quality, is political will, and all the detail that Dave's talking about in great levels of detail. It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant, the detail. It's the political will at the highest level, and that's what's holding us back. And actually, we shouldn't even be bothering talking at this level, what we're doing today. And I know I talked about Liverpool, but we shouldn't be bothering. We just need to focus on the high level political detail.
Agree.
Yeah, I think we're probably all agreed on that. David, have you had a question?
Yes, okay. Well, I can't disagree with Mark, but at a smaller level, I was very interested with what Lisa had to say about the switch to EVs, and she's absolutely right. Obviously, the end of diesel and petrol should be a real opportunity in urban areas, especially inner urban areas, to ditch individual car ownership and move to car sharing. And I think it may be possible to try and persuade sympathetic Labour councils that they shouldn't be putting in too many EV chargers. In fact, they should try to avoid doing that and just have car sharing, so that people don't have the option of going to individual car ownership, except in special circumstances. I'd be interested on Lisa's views.
Yeah, car sharing, I think that's, absolutely, some people always need, some cars, whatever it is to get around. But yeah, let's get rid of car ownership, one house, 3 cars or whatever it is, and move more to sort of car sharing as the sort of in the hierarchy below public transport, below cycling and walking.
And I think that means encouraging sympathetic councils just to not go hell for leather in installing EV charging points everywhere.
Yeah, they see it as the silver bullet, don't they, at the moment? That's the problem.
But I think there are Labour councils that could be persuaded, and that's just a matter of stopping the rollout.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Lisa. That was really great. I think, did I see Simon? Have you got a very quick question? I can squeeze in a very quick question, and then we're going to go on to Ruth for the last word.
Well, I guess just to try and round up the point that Mark made that I think was bang on, and in fact to come back on that EV charging point, when even boroughs like Waltham Forest, who are recognised to be national leaders, are rolling out EV charging points as quick as we can, what's in Lisa, I guess in your perspective, what is the single biggest silver bullet we have? We don't have any silver bullets, but what's the best one we've got, as it were?
Wow, I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but certainly out. I don't know about London, Simon, but certainly outside London, the millions that are being poured into new roads. I'm not just talking about RIS, but local roads, local development funded roads. If we can stop those and divert that funding into much better uses, I think that's a big start. In my view, because we need funding for all of this stuff, don't we? Road pricing would be the next one.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Lisa. That was a really brilliant presentation and great discussion. I'm sure everybody will want to join me in thanking you for joining us. Now, Ruth, are you there? Are you there, Ruth? She was there a minute ago. Yeah, you're muted, Ruth.
Muted, Ruth. You're muted.
We can't hear you. We can see you.
Right, hello, sorry, my train's just coming in, I'm just about to get on Eurostar. What I wanted to say is, thanks Lisa, it was fab. What we really have to do is stop obsessing about whether we have tarmac spaces in rural areas for cycling, or wheeling as it's called, because only that will mean that all these areas are accessible for everybody, no matter their ability. So we need to be concentrating on having tarmac paths in rural areas that people can use. Thank you.
Right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you.
Last word. Last word.
No, is that not your last word? Sorry, Ruth. Go on.
Okay. No, that's it. That is the last word.
That was the last word. Good. Great.
Thank you. Okay.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.